Every shot fired tells a tale. Subscribe today and uncover the legends of the Wild West. The wind carried dust and silence through the dying town of Pecos. Once, this stretch of desert had been the vein of trade and cattle, a place where laughter filled the saloons and the clang of the blacksmith's hammer echoed from dawn to dusk. Now, it was nothing but a carcass picked clean by vultures in human form, bandits, outlaws, and the lawmen too scared to face them. In the distance, a rider appeared, tall, broad-shouldered, and slow as the desert sun itself. His horse, a black stallion with one pale eye, moved like a ghost across the sand. The man wore a dust-covered duster and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. On his hip rested a Colt Peacemaker polished from years of use. That man was Clay Allison, known once across Texas and New Mexico as the Gentleman Gunfighter. A legend wrapped in contradictions. A man who could smile at a stranger, then shoot him dead a heartbeat later. Some called him crazy. Some called him righteous. But no one ever called him slow. Clay hadn't set foot in Pecos for over a year. He had sworn to stay out of town, away from blood and whiskey. But the world had a way of dragging him back, especially when it smelled of death. When he rode down Main Street, the place looked like a graveyard. Doors shuttered, windows broken. A sign hung half-crooked from the saloon, the Silver Spur. The same bar where he'd once danced, drank, and fought like the devil himself. He tied his horse, stepped onto the warped wooden planks, and pushed through the saloon doors. Inside, a handful of locals sat quiet as stones. The piano in the corner was silent. The bartender, a wiry old man with a scar down his cheek, looked up, froze, and whispered, "Well, I'll be damned. Crazy Clay's come back." Clay tipped his hat, voice calm and low. "Didn't plan to stay long, Joe. Just came to ask who's been burning this town down." Joe poured him a shot of whiskey with trembling hands. "You don't want that answer, Clay. Not anymore. Sheriff's dead. Law's gone. And the man running Pecos now ain't the kind you reason with." Clay downed the whiskey in one motion. "Name: Deke Morrows. Calls himself the New Law. Runs with 20 men meaner than rattlesnakes. They take what they want, kill who they please." Clay stared into the empty glass. "And the sheriff?" Joe swallowed hard. "Hung him in the square. Left him there 3 days for everyone to see." For a long moment, Clay didn't move. Only the ticking of a wall clock filled the silence. Then he spoke, his tone flat as iron. "Then Pecos ain't got a sheriff no more. It's got me." Joe blinked. "You can't fight 20 men, Clay. Not anymore. You're one man." Clay placed a silver coin on the counter, stood, and adjusted his gun belt. "One man's enough." Outside, thunder rolled across the desert like the growl of some ancient beast. Clay walked into the street as the wind picked up, kicking dust around his boots. He looked toward the gallows at the far end of town, where a rope still hung, swaying slowly. He remembered the last time he'd drawn his gun, a fight outside Santa Fe that left 3 men dead and a 4th begging for mercy. He'd sworn then to put violence behind him, but peace was a luxury men like him were never meant to afford. A voice called from the shadows. "Well, look what crawled out of the grave. The Gentleman Gunfighter himself." Clay turned. A man stepped from an alley, tall, with a thick mustache and a deputy's badge that gleamed under the stormlight. He grinned, hand resting on his pistol. "Deke Morrows heard you might show up. Said if you do, to bring you in alive if possible. Dead if not." Clay's hand hovered an inch from his holster. "You wear that badge proud, boy, but I can see the fear in your eyes." The deputy's grin faltered. "Ain't fear, just the wind." Clay's eyes narrowed. "Then hold still and see if it's fast enough to save you." The street exploded in a blur of motion, the flash of steel, the crack of thunder, and the echo of a single gunshot that tore through the storm. When the dust settled, the deputy lay face down in the mud, his pistol unfired. Clay stood over him, smoke curling from his revolver. He holstered the gun slowly, as if the world had returned to its natural order. From the saloon windows, faces watched in silence. No one cheered. No one spoke. In Pecos, men learned that justice was just another word for violence done by the right person. Clay mounted his horse again. He turned toward the gallows, his coat flapping in the wind, and whispered to himself, "Guess the devil's got more work for me yet." As he rode out, lightning split the sky and the first drops of rain began to fall, fat, heavy, and red with dust. Somewhere beyond the hills, Deke Morrow's men would soon hear what happened in town. And when they came, they wouldn't stop until Clay Allison was dead. But Clay wasn't planning to hide. He'd come back to Pecos for one reason: to remind the world that there are still men who don't need a badge to bring judgment. The rain didn't last long in Pecos. It came in hard, like a punishment, and vanished before the ground could even taste it. By the time the sun clawed its way through the clouds, Clay Allison was already 5 miles north, following the tracks of Deke Morrow's riders. He rode without hurry. The desert wasn't a place to rush through. It punished impatience with heat and thirst. Every hoofbeat echoed like a countdown. His horse, Brimstone, snorted beneath him, its black coat gleaming with sweat and dust. Clay's eyes scanned the horizon, where the earth met the sky in a haze of gold and blood. Somewhere out there, the men who killed Sheriff Tom Bragg were drinking, laughing, thinking themselves untouchable. Clay had no warrant, no deputy, no law behind him, just a single name burning in his mind like a brand. Deke Morrow's. He remembered the man's face, sharp, cruel, eyes like a rattlesnake. They'd once ridden together for a cattle company out of Amarillo, until Deke shot their foreman in the back over a card game. Clay had put a bullet through Deke's shoulder that night, but couldn't finish the job. Now, years later, the debt was coming due. At noon, Clay reached the first sign of life: a small ranch house half burned, the smell of rot hanging in the air. He dismounted, revolver drawn, and stepped carefully through the wreckage. Inside, 2 bodies lay slumped near the fireplace, a man and a woman, both stripped of boots and dignity. Clay knelt beside them, his jaw tightening. On the wall above, scrawled in blood, were 2 words: "No law." He stood slowly, hat brim shadowing his face. "Then I guess I'll have to do." A faint sound came from behind the house, a creak, then a muffled sob. Clay turned, gun ready. He found a boy, no older than 10, crouched behind a trough, shaking. His face was streaked with dust and tears. Clay holstered his gun, crouched down, voice low. "Easy, son. I ain't gonna hurt you." The boy's lips trembled. They took my sister, said they'd come back for me." Clay's expression didn't change, but something cold and old stirred in his chest. "How long ago?" "Maybe 2 days." "Which way'd they ride?" The boy pointed east, toward the rocky ridges. "The one with the big scar, he led 'em." Clay nodded. "That'd be Deke's right hand, Larkin." He gave the boy his canteen and the reins of Brimstone. "Ride west to Pecos. Find Joe at the Silver Spur. Tell him Clay sent you." The boy looked up, scared and hopeful all at once. "Mister, are you gonna kill them?" Clay looked toward the horizon. Every last one. By sundown, Clay found them. 5 riders camped near the ridge, their laughter echoing between the rocks. Bottles clinked, firelight danced, and the woman's terrified sobs came faint from behind a wagon. Clay crouched low, watching. He counted guns, studied patterns, memorized their habits. He could have waited for dawn, could have ambushed them one by one. But Clay Allison wasn't a patient man when it came to monsters. He slipped from the shadows, revolver steady in his right hand, knife in his left. The first shot tore through the silence, clean, cold, final. A man by the fire dropped before his drink hit the ground. 2 more turned, shouting, fumbling for their pistols. Clay was already moving. 1 shot, 2, then a knife spun through the air, sinking deep into a third man's throat. The last one, a giant with a scar running from his ear to his jaw, grabbed the woman and shoved a gun to her head. "Stop right there, Allison, or she dies." Clay stopped, eyes locked on him. "Larkin," he said quietly, "I should have killed you in Amarillo." Larkin's grin was wide and yellow. "You ain't fast enough now, old man." "Maybe not." Clay said, lowering his gun slightly. "But you talk too much." Larkin blinked, and in that heartbeat, Clay drew. The gun roared once. The woman screamed. Larkin's head snapped back, blood spraying across the wagon's canvas. He collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the crackle of fire and the woman's ragged breath. Clay walked over, picked up his knife, and wiped the blade clean on Larkin's coat. She stared at him with wide, tearful eyes. "Who are you?" Clay holstered his gun. "Nobody worth remembering." He cut the ropes binding her wrists. "There's a boy waitin' in Pecos. Ride west. Don't look back." "What about you?" Clay glanced at the bodies around him. "I got a few more ghosts to make before I rest." He buried none of them. Men like that didn't deserve the dirt's mercy. When the sun rose the next morning, vultures circled overhead, and Clay was already back on the trail. He found a spent cartridge stamped DM, Deke Morrow's initials. It wasn't a message. It was a dare. By the time he returned to Pecos, word had spread. The townsfolk who once hid behind their shutters now stood in the streets, whispering his name, some in fear, some in hope. Joe, the bartender, met him outside the saloon. "Heard you took down Larkin's boys." Clay nodded. 5 down. 15 to go. Joe lowered his voice. "Morrow's is forted up in the old army barracks by Dry Creek. Got men with rifles, dynamite, horses. You go in there, you ain't coming out." Clay lit a cigarette, the flame reflecting in his eyes. "Then I'll make sure they don't either," Joe swallowed. "You can't do this alone." Clay exhaled smoke through his nose. "Ain't the first time I've heard that." He turned toward the edge of town, where the dust shimmered red in the dying sun. Behind him, the people of Pecos watched in silence. Some saw a savior, others saw a madman. Clay didn't care which. The desert had taken his peace, his friends, his sanity. But it left him one thing: a purpose. He mounted Brimstone, adjusted his hat, and muttered the words only the wind could hear. Blood answers blood. Then he rode east, into the blazing horizon, where Deke Morrow's waited, and where the final reckoning began to take shape in the dust. The sun burned low over the desert, a ball of fire sinking behind the jagged hills. Clay rode hard through the red dusk, the wind whipping dust against his face. Ahead, the old army barracks at Dry Creek stood like a scar on the land, a fortress of crumbling stone and iron, taken over by men with black hearts and steady guns. He dismounted behind a ridge and crouched, studying the camp through the glass of a stolen spy scope. 2 men guarded the gate. Lanterns flickered along the walls. He counted 7 rifles, maybe more. They'd built makeshift barricades with wagons and sandbags, turning the ruins into a nest of vipers. Inside, he saw what he expected. Deke Morrow's, sitting on a crate, laughing with his men, bottle in hand. The man looked almost the same as he had years ago, when they'd worked together, same hard jaw, same cold eyes, but richer now, meaner. A man who'd learned to love power the way others love women. Clay slid the scope away, checked his revolver, and whispered to himself, "One way in, one way out." He moved in the dark, every footstep measured. The desert wind howled through the ruins, masking the sound of his boots. He slipped behind a half-collapsed wall, knelt beside a wagon stacked with crates marked dynamite, and smiled faintly. Fate had a sense of humor. The first guard never saw him coming. A quick twist of the knife and the man sank wordlessly into the sand. Clay dragged the body out of sight and took his rifle. The second guard turned at the wrong moment. One shot, quiet and clean, sent him spinning backward. Clay waited for silence. None of the others stirred. He crept closer, crouching behind the barricade, heart steady as the ticking of a clock. He took a stick of dynamite, cut the fuse short, and struck a match against his boot heel. The tiny flame danced. He threw it through the open window of the barracks. For a second, there was nothing. Then came the roar, fire, light, and chaos tearing through the night. The shockwave lifted sand and bone, and men screamed as the roof buckled and timbers collapsed. Clay moved like a shadow through the smoke, firing with both hands. One man went down clutching his throat. Another spun as a bullet tore through his chest. A shotgun blast thundered back, shattering stone near Clay's head. He dropped behind cover, reloaded, and shot the man who fired. The camp was a storm of gunfire now. Clay's duster flapped as he advanced, relentless, eyes fixed on the glow at the heart of the burning barracks. Deke Morrows staggered out through the smoke, coughing, revolver in hand. His face was smeared with ash and blood, but his grin was wide. "You always did make an entrance, Clay." Clay leveled his gun. "You always did run your mouth." "You could have joined me back then," Deke shouted over the fire. "We could have owned this land. Instead, you play hero for a town that'll forget your name by next week." Clay took a slow step forward. "Maybe, but they'll remember yours long enough to curse it." They fired at the same time. Deke's bullet tore through Clay's shoulder. Clay's shot caught Deke in the leg, sending him to the dirt. Clay stumbled, clutching the wound, his breath sharp with pain. Deke crawled backward, dragging himself behind a crate, laughing through bloody teeth. "Ain't that something? The great Gentleman Gunfighter bleeds like any other man." Clay reloaded with trembling hands, blood dripping down his sleeve. He walked forward, gun raised. "Difference is," he said, "I don't stop." Deke fired again, the shot grazing Clay's arm. Clay's return bullet shattered Deke's pistol, spinning it from his hand. Deke froze, chest heaving, eyes flickering between fear and fury. "You ain't the law, Clay." Clay's voice was quiet. "Never said I was." He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed through the ruins, rolling across the desert until only the wind answered. Deke slumped, still smiling even as the life left him. Clay stood there for a long moment, breathing hard, surrounded by the dead and the fire. Then, as the adrenaline faded, his knees gave way. He fell to one side, clutching his shoulder. The world tilted, blurred. Through the haze, he saw flashes of memory. The ranch where he grew up, his mother's voice telling him to be kind, the night he killed his first man in a duel outside Santa Fe. The cheers, the fear, the emptiness that followed. He had thought killing would make the world cleaner. It only made it quieter. He woke at dawn, lying in the dirt. The fire had died to embers, and the air was thick with smoke. The pain in his shoulder throbbed like a living thing. He tore a strip from his coat and tied it tight. Brimstone stood nearby, loyal and patient, as if waiting for him to rise. Clay looked toward the horizon, red, endless, unforgiving. The law of Pecos was written in blood again, but justice was never more than temporary in the West. Somewhere out there, another man would take Deke's place. Another evil would crawl out of the dust. He holstered his revolver, mounted up, and whispered to the morning, "One more ride." Then Clay Allison, the gentleman gunfighter, the madman of the plains, rode toward the sun, alone, wounded, and unbroken, leaving behind only smoke, silence, and the legend of a man who made his own law. Dawn came cold and colorless over the plains. Clay rode slow, his coat torn and his shoulder bound tight, every breath a knife. Brimstone's hooves struck the hard ground with steady rhythm, the only sound in a world that felt emptied of life. Behind him, Dry Creek still smoked. The buzzards would come soon. He didn't look back. He rode south toward the canyon country where the wind sang through the rocks like ghosts. He needed time to rest, to bleed, to think. But men like Clay Allison never got time. Not in this land. Not with his name whispered in every saloon from Amarillo to Santa Fe. By noon, he reached a watering hole called Devil's Basin. A lone shack sat beside it, leaning like a drunk in the wind. Clay slid off his horse and limped inside. The place smelled of sweat and kerosene. Behind the counter, an old Mexican woman looked up from her Bible. Her eyes widened when she saw him. "Dios mío, you are Clay Allison." "Was," he said. "Now I'm just a man looking for a drink." She poured him water, silent, studying the wound on his arm. "There are riders," she whispered. "3. They come this morning. Ask about you." Clay's jaw tightened. "Which way'd they ride?" "East, toward Red Mesa. They say there is a bounty now. $500 for your head." Clay smiled thinly. "Guess I'm worth more dead than alive again." He finished the water, left 2 silver coins on the counter, and stepped back into the sunlight. The air was sharp, heavy with coming rain. He knew who'd sent the riders. Deke Morrows might be dead, but the men who followed him wouldn't let Clay's vengeance go unanswered. They'd come in small packs first, then larger ones. It always went that way. As he rode toward Red Mesa, the sky turned black. The first bullet came from nowhere, slicing the air past his ear. Brimstone reared, screaming. Clay hit the dirt and rolled behind a boulder, drawing his Colt. 3 figures appeared on the ridge, rifles in hand, shapes against the lightning. "We got you, Allison," one shouted. "Dead or alive makes no difference to us." Clay fired once. The man dropped, tumbling down the slope. Another muzzle flashed. The shot grazed Clay's thigh. He fired back, 2 quick shots, reloading before the echoes died. One rider fell. The last turned to flee, but Clay's bullet caught him in the spine. The desert went still again. Clay sat in the mud, blood mixing with the rain, and let the silence settle. His hand trembled for the first time in years. He looked at it, disgusted. "Gettin' slow, old man," he muttered. The storm broke then, hard and wild. He limped to his horse, tied the wound tighter, and rode for the nearest ridge. Lightning lit the plains, showing flashes of what looked like ghosts. Men he'd killed, standing in the rain, faces hollow, watching him pass. By nightfall, he reached Red Mesa. The town was little more than a cluster of shacks and a church that hadn't seen prayer in a decade. He rode down the main street slow, the rain hissing off his coat. Lamps flickered in windows, curtains moved. Everyone knew who he was. At the saloon, he tied Brimstone and stepped inside. Conversation stopped. A dozen eyes followed him to the bar. The barkeep, a heavy man with a drooping mustache, said nothing as Clay set down a wet dollar and asked for whiskey. "You bring hell with you, Allison," the man said finally. Clay took a drink. "Hell's been following me a long time." A younger man at the far table stood, hand twitching near his gun. "You're him, ain't you? The one who killed Morrows?" Clay didn't look up. "Depends who's asking. Name's Cole. Morrows was my brother." The saloon went silent. Clay sighed. "He was a bastard. You got the same blood, that means you're one too." Cole's face twisted in rage. "Draw!" Clay didn't move. He just turned slightly, eyes flat, voice low. "You sure you want that?" Cole's hand flashed. Clay moved faster. 2 shots. Cole's gun flew from his grip, and he fell against the table, clutching his chest. The crowd scattered. Clay holstered his gun, finished the whiskey, and walked out into the rain. The sky cracked with thunder, like the heavens themselves disapproving. He walked to Brimstone, pausing when a voice spoke behind him. "You're running out of time, Clay." It was Joe, the bartender from Pecos. He stood under a porch, soaked and pale. "They're saying the Rangers are coming for you. Real law this time. You can't kill your way out of this." Clay looked at him through the rain. "Maybe not. But I ain't hiding either." "Why, Clay? You could have left it all behind. Why come back? Why start again?" Clay's eyes darkened. "Because somebody's got to remember what right used to mean. Ain't about law, ain't about peace. It's about balance." Joe stepped closer. "And when the balance means killing every man who crosses you?" Clay swung into the saddle. "Then that's what it means." He turned Brimstone toward the open plain. Lightning split the sky again, showing the endless desert waiting ahead. The rain fell harder, washing the blood from his coat, but not the ghosts from his soul. Somewhere out there, the Rangers were coming. So were bounty hunters, old enemies, men who wanted to wear his legend like a prize. He'd meet them all. Clay Allison rode into the storm, a dying man chasing a dying code, the last outlaw of honor in a land that had forgotten what that word meant. The days bled into each other as Clay rode south, following no road, guided only by the wind and the weight of his conscience. The desert stretched endless before him, burnt red, yellow, and gray beneath a sky too wide for mercy. His horse limped, tired and bleeding from the last run. The sun cooked them both alive, but Clay didn't care much for comfort anymore. He wasn't sure he cared for anything. He'd been running for 2 weeks since Red Mesa. The newspapers called him the Devil of Pecos. They said he'd shot 12 men and burned a sheriff's office to the ground. It wasn't true. He'd killed 9, and the sheriff's office had burned itself. But stories were like brush fire. They didn't care for truth, only fuel. One night, Clay came across an old mining shack buried half in sand. He tied the horse and stepped inside. The air smelled of rot and dust. A single chair stood in the corner beside a rusted lantern. He sat down, took out his revolver, and spun the cylinder. 6 bullets. Always 6. He closed his eyes and saw their faces. The men he'd shot, the ones who'd begged, and the ones who didn't have time to. He remembered the sheriff's last breath in Pecos, the fear in that boy's eyes before the duel. Clay had told himself they all deserved it. Maybe they did. But lately, the faces didn't go away when he told them to. At dawn, he woke to hoofbeats. Not one horse. Many. He stepped to the window, peering through a crack in the wall. 5 riders moved slow across the ridge, silhouetted against the rising sun. Bounty hunters. Rangers, maybe. He couldn't tell, but he knew their kind. Steady, patient, and paid by the kill. Clay packed up what little he had and slipped out the back. He led his horse into the gulch, following the dry riverbed toward the cliffs. He'd learned every trick the land could offer, how to hide, how to make a trail vanish. But no man outruns death forever. By noon, the heat shimmered like ghosts on the horizon. Then came the crack of a rifle. The bullet tore through his hat, grazing his ear. He dove behind a boulder, drew his Colt, and fired 3 times. One of the riders fell from his horse, tumbling into the dust. The rest scattered, taking cover. The air smelled of gunpowder and sweat. Clay reloaded, keeping his breath slow. He could hear them shouting, voices carried by the wind. "Spread out! He's wounded! $50 each for a clean shot." He smiled bitterly. $50. That was what his life was worth now. The fight dragged on through the afternoon. Clay shot 2 more before a bullet found his shoulder, spinning him to the ground. The pain was hot, alive. He crawled behind a rock, teeth clenched, and pressed his bandana into the wound. Blood soaked through. The last 2 hunters kept their distance, waiting for him to bleed out. Then thunder rolled across the canyon, not from the sky, but from the north. Riders, 10 of them, moving fast, dust boiling behind. For a moment, Clay thought more hunters had come, but when he saw the silver stars glinting on their chests, he knew better. Texas Rangers. The bounty men turned their horses and fled. Clay didn't move. He couldn't. The Rangers fanned out, rifles aimed, eyes hard. The one in front, broad-shouldered, weathered face, rode closer. "Clay Allison," he said, voice deep as gravel. "You're under arrest for the murder of Sheriff Dillard, Deputy Wills, and 7 others. I'd suggest you lay down that iron." Clay looked up, blood drying on his chin. "You boys sure took your time," he rasped. The Ranger didn't smile. "Justice takes time. You've been writing your own law too long." Clay laughed weakly. "My law kept men honest. Yours just keeps the wrong men alive." The Ranger's eyes narrowed. "We ain't here to argue philosophy." A shot rang out. One of the Rangers flinched, and Clay saw a bounty hunter high on the ridge taking aim. Without thinking, Clay snatched his revolver and fired. The hunter toppled from his perch. The sound echoed across the canyon, and for a heartbeat, silence fell. The Rangers lowered their guns. The leader stared at Clay, half anger, half respect. "You could have let him shoot me." Clay shrugged. "Didn't seem fair. Man ought to see his killer before he dies." The Ranger nodded slowly. "You're a strange breed, Allison. You kill for your own reasons, but you ain't rotten through. Maybe once you were something else." Clay leaned back against the rock, exhaustion washing over him. "Maybe once," he murmured. They bound his hands and lifted him onto a horse. As they rode north toward Pecos, the land stretched endless again. Clay looked out at the desert, the same place that had raised him, tested him, and turned him into something half man, half legend. By sunset, they reached a small outpost. The Rangers set up camp. Clay sat by the fire, wrists tied, watching the flames lick the dry air. The leader sat across from him, cleaning his rifle. "You could have been a lawman," the Ranger said. "You got the aim for it." Clay smiled faintly. "A lawman answers to men. I only ever answered to myself." "Maybe that's why you're alone." Clay looked into the fire. "Maybe that's the price." The Ranger stood, nodded once, and walked away. The night grew cold. Coyotes howled somewhere beyond the hills. Clay closed his eyes and thought of home, of the ranch, the horses, the quiet mornings before the world went mad. He wondered if there was still a road back to peace, or if men like him were born just to die under a bleeding sun. In the distance, thunder rolled again. Not the storm kind this time. Hooves, heavy, many. The Rangers stirred, reaching for their rifles. Clay's eyes snapped open. He heard the sound before the others did, a war cry, wild and fierce. "Riders!" one Ranger shouted. "Coming fast!" Clay strained against his ropes. The Ranger captain ran to him. "Who the hell are they?" Clay's voice was calm, almost amused. "You're about to meet Deke Morrow's gang. I left them a debt unpaid." The captain cursed, cutting Clay loose. "You ride with us, Allison. You fight, you live. You run, you die." Clay stood, rolling his shoulders, feeling the old fire return. He picked up his Colt, checked the cylinder, 5 bullets left. He smiled. "Then let's settle all our laws tonight." As the first bullets tore through the night, Clay Allison stepped forward into the firelight, eyes cold and steady. The legend of Crazy Clay wasn't over yet. Night exploded with gunfire. The Morrow's gang came like a sandstorm, 20 men on horseback, yelling and firing into the dark. Muzzle flashes lit their faces in savage bursts. The Rangers scrambled for cover behind the wagons, shouting orders. Bullets tore through canvas, wood, and flesh. Horses screamed. The desert turned alive with chaos. Clay Allison stood at the edge of the firelight, revolver steady, eyes burning like twin coals. The years of killing, the ghosts, the guilt, all of it sharpened into one last purpose. He wasn't fighting for the law. He wasn't fighting for redemption. He was fighting to end it. "Rangers left flank!" shouted the captain. "Keep the bastards pinned!" Clay moved like a shadow, firing twice, dropping 2 riders clean out of their saddles. He ducked behind a wagon as splinters flew. A bullet grazed his cheek. The sting only fed his calm. He reloaded by feel, each motion muscle memory from a lifetime of violence. The leader of the Morrow's gang, a hulking brute named Silas Deke, rode through the smoke, screaming Clay's name. "Allison, you took my brother. You think you can hide behind badges?" Clay stepped out from cover, walking straight into the firelight. "Ain't hiding," he said. "You been looking for the devil, Deke. Here I am." The gang roared. Deke charged, rifle raised, and Clay fired. Once, twice. Deke's horse reared and went down hard. The outlaw rolled free, firing back wild. Clay dove behind a fallen Ranger, his revolver spitting thunder. The fight dragged on for what felt like hours, but was maybe 10 minutes. The night burned red. The Rangers held their line, though half were down. The Morrows fell one by one, but they didn't quit. Men screamed, horses bolted, the air thick with gunpowder and blood. Then silence. Smoke drifted like ghosts. Only 5 men still stood, 2 Rangers, Clay, and 2 of Deke's wounded men crawling toward the rocks. Deke staggered up, bleeding from the shoulder, eyes wide with hate. "You killed my kin. You took everything." Clay wiped blood from his mouth, voice low. "Your brother killed a sheriff. He burned a home with a boy inside. Justice had a price." "Justice?" Deke spat. "You're just another killer wearing a fancy name." Clay holstered his gun. "Maybe so, but tonight there's only room for one of us left in hell." Deke roared and drew, but Clay was faster. One shot, clean, cold, final. Deke fell backward into the dust, eyes staring at nothing. The echo rolled across the desert, then died. Clay stood there breathing hard, blood and smoke in his lungs. The Rangers watched in silence. One of them stepped forward. The captain, his arm bleeding but steady. "It's over, Allison." Clay looked at him, eyes hollow. "No, it's just finished." The captain studied him, then nodded slowly. "You could ride with us, face a court, maybe start over." Clay shook his head. "Startin' over means forgiving yourself. I ain't earned that." He turned, walking past the dead, the dying, the fire burning low. The desert stretched out before him, endless and empty, the same way it had begun. He untied his horse and climbed up, wincing as his wounds pulled. The stars hung low, cold and silver. The wind whispered through the canyon, carrying away the last echoes of battle. The Ranger called after him. "Where you headed, Clay?" Clay looked back once, his face half shadow, half light. "Where the road runs out," he said. Then he rode into the dark. By dawn, there was no trace of him, only tracks fading into the sand, and a story that would grow like wildfire across the frontier. Some said he died in Mexico, some swore they saw him years later, living quiet under another name. But in the saloons and camps of the West, men still whispered the same words. Crazy Clay, he wasn't the law. He was what the law became when it gave up. The legend of the Gentleman Gunfighter lived on. They say every man's got his own kind of justice. For some, it's written in books. For others, in blood. Clay Allison's story ain't about right or wrong. It asks about what happens when a man becomes both. If you believe legends like this shouldn't be forgotten, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe to keep the Old West alive. Every week we bring you the men, the myths, and the madness that carved America out of dust and gunpowder. Because out here, justice never really dies. It just rides under another name.